Hi, you're listening to Engagement Drivers, presented by EveryoneSocial. Each week, we'll share actionable tips, strategies, and success stories that you and your teams can use to steer your brand, social, and employee engagement in the right direction.
Welcome, everybody, to Employee Advocacy Week. It's our final session of the week, which is crazy to think that this week has flown by. Hope everyone is enjoying the sessions, enjoyed the pre-recorded content. I'm very excited today to close out with Mita Mallick here, the head of inclusion and equity and impact at Carta. We're going to be talking about the importance of power of storytelling on LinkedIn. And it's a great topic. I think LinkedIn has become a powerful tool for a lot of us out there for not only our personal brands, but company brands. And what's really cool too is Mita here also was voted top LinkedIn voice of 2020. So very excited to kind of dive into these questions and learn more from her. So Mita, welcome. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Of course. Yeah. So before we dive in, we'd love for you to just give a little background about yourself and kind of what you do and maybe how you got involved in social media, and we'll go from there.
So a little bit about me. I'm a passionate storyteller focused on multicultural marketing. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion executive currently working at Carta. And most importantly, I'm a mom, working mom to Jay, who I joke is 8 going on 18 and Priya, who's 6 going on 16. So that's been a glimpse into my life the last 17 months of this pandemic.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So yeah, let's just jump right in because I'm sure this is going to be a really interesting topic, and I think we'll have some questions along the way. So again, if anyone does have questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A option. We'll try to get to those throughout the conversation or the end here before we wrap up. So, I think before we begin on the actual topic, we'd love to kind of understand, why do you personally enjoy the LinkedIn platform specifically, and what kind of values do you see it bringing your own personal brand?
I love LinkedIn because I believe it's a platform of generosity. It's something my friend Callie Schweitzer says a lot. And I find that people are just incredibly supportive. It's a place to learn and grow. And I think it's a place where we can politely disagree and learn from each other. And so I think that's so important. I think that's something we've lost the ability to do in many situations, is how do you disagree and still love and respect each other? And I feel like I can do that on LinkedIn. So that's why I'm drawn to LinkedIn. When I used to work at Unilever, I used to run employer brand, and I had a direct report at the time who I would consider a reverse mentor. And she said to me, "You love to write, you love to storytell, you should be on LinkedIn." So my journey on LinkedIn began 5-6 years ago. And it was just, I think it was last year that I was named the top voice. So it wasn't something that really happened overnight, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think I totally agree too. I really like that it is a place to kind of, friendly, but disagree about certain things. Of course, there's always some times where it goes the opposite direction of what you want to see. But I really like that you can disagree or have thoughts or kind of share your feelings. And it seems that people are open to that more on LinkedIn than kind of any of the other platforms out there currently.
I would agree with that, which is why I'm on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Exactly. So I think along with that too, what does storytelling really mean to you, right? We've heard this a lot. We're saying build your personal brand, right? Tell your story. But I'd really love to understand, you've done a great job with it, but what does it mean to you? And why should more people or brands really start to harness this power of telling a good story on social media? So kind of 2 parts to that.
I was just having this discussion with my team yesterday, and I was saying, you can teach people data and concepts, but it's the stories that people are going to remember. And it's one of the sort of oldest traditions in human civilization is storytelling. And so when you share a story and something hits a chord and resonates, people are more likely going to remember what you were trying to teach them or the point you were going to land. For me, storytelling always has to be authentic. So if you're following me on LinkedIn, you will see there are 4 or 5 things I generally post about, just general areas. And they're areas that I feel passionate about. And for me, it becomes inauthentic if I'm posting about something that I don't really know a lot about, or that I'm just posting to post. And so storytelling always, I think, has to come from a place of authenticity. I also think what more and more you'll see on LinkedIn when you think about it as being a platform of generosity is that storytelling in service of others. So storytelling to teach, to communicate, to create community. I find that those are the things that will really resonate with the LinkedIn audience.
Yeah, that's great. I think what's the challenge though, I think for brands, right? Because I think personally, obviously with people, it's pretty easy to kind of show your personality. Well, it could be easy. Sometimes it's hard for people to be out there and open, but or seeing more brands kind of starting to have a personality too. And I think that's another key part to this too. So, I mean, what do you kind of think like brands should be doing for storytelling as well? Like how can they get better at it? Not only personally, from an individual, but how does a brand get involved in this a little bit more?
I would say if I look at the individual for a second as well, people are scared to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. Our stories are constantly being rewritten, just as we've seen the pandemic, and there might be parts of our story that we're not willing to share yet. And so the more that we can be authentic and just really hit on an insight, that's when we'll see it really resonates. And the same is true for brands. You can't be all things to all people. That's marketing 101, right? So my cup of coffee is my cup of coffee that I like for whatever reason. And so you have to really think about like, what is the unique value proposition? Why do you have this product and service? How is it surprising, delighting, or enhancing the quality of someone's life? And just to really hone in on that. And that's what I think is so important. I think when you see like very generic posts, like very obvious things, those are not things that are going to be where your thumb is going to stop. That's for any of us. We're all consumers. It's the things that like give a different point of view, ask a question, are very intriguing, provocative. That's when you stop and you start to, engage in the content, I would say.
Yeah. And I think audiences too are just expecting more out of people and brands. And we've noticed that obviously with running an employee advocacy platform where we're telling people how to share what they should be sharing or sharing what they're all about. But it seems that audiences also expect more from who they follow or what they consume. Like gone are the days of just, oh, here's a post, here's a link to something, and that's that. People scroll past that. They're so used to seeing these things. Even with ads, the same thing, like tell a better story, it seems is what really resonates with audiences.
Yeah. And I would tie that into what I do every day, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. You think about inclusive marketing. Mm-hmm. We are all voting with our wallet. We can vote with our wallet. And this idea of belief-driven buying is on the rise. And it's not just one generation, it's cutting across all generations. And you have to be consistent in your storytelling and consistent in who you're standing up for. And so if I'm going to post something about Pride in June, and yet my company isn't actually showing up for the LGBTQ community in terms of policies and programs, then there's a disconnect, and consumers are going to quickly see holes in the story as well. So the authenticity, consistency, and the purpose are just so key in storytelling.
I think it's a great point is actually showing up to what you're sharing or what you're telling the world, because people, like you said, they can read through that. They can tell if you're not being authentic about it. And again, another key thing for us is authenticity with content, and building that trust really goes far with everything. Cool. So, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but would love to kind of dive in a little bit further. So we know LinkedIn has changed over the years. I remember joining it right after I graduated college, which feels like forever ago, back in 2010, but it was kind of the place where it's like, okay, here's where I work, here's my resume, start throwing it out to recruiters. And it's interesting to see that way it's changed over the years. And I think especially since the pandemic too, I mean, we're still kind of in that right now, but people just telling their stories and being more authentic and more personable instead of just always about looking for a job or this place is hiring. Why do you think LinkedIn has become the channel for storytelling in your opinion? I mean, I think beyond that personable way to connect and a little bit more friendly Discord, but what else do you think is that reason for that shift over these years?
I think part of the shift is that we all want to, I don't want my entire career and life experiences to be just dictated to the resume, this one-dimensional view of myself. And what I love about LinkedIn, and for anyone listening, is that you can create your thought leadership in your platform, and you can do that for your company as well. And so if I am looking to see what Todd has done and I get his resume, I can look him up on LinkedIn and get more of a feel of what are his thoughts on these opinions? What is he posting? What is he sharing? And it's also a great tool to pivot. If I'm interested in marketing, but I've only ever done sales, I can start to position myself and engage in thoughts I have about marketing, what I'm seeing brands get right, what I'm seeing brands get wrong, great storytelling. And so when a recruiter is looking up my profile, they start to get a fuller view of me rather than a one-dimensional view. And that's what I think more and more is happening as well.
Yeah. And it's something that we look at too. Like when we're hiring too, we look at LinkedIn or other social profiles and just see like, what are they sharing? Like what kind of information, how are they building, trust with people that are looking at, especially in marketing for us, because we like to see like they're sharing thoughts about marketing or or what they're doing or ideas, which I think tells a story. And we're seeing that from tons of brands that we work with too, and a lot of them in an enterprise space where they're having recruiters or employer brand, people sharing more content about the company, which is helping attract people. We have people on the marketing team who are sharing culture stuff and telling that story, right? And it's helping drive way more top talent for these brands when that story is authentic. And we're seeing that a lot more ourselves, just in general from the audiences. And I think that's really key, right? Is just kind of mixing it up and telling that story.
Absolutely. And the other point about the company piece is key. Sure, I'm building my personal brand, my thought leadership, but I'm also an ambassador of a company. And so people, sure, they want to work for mission-driven companies, but you also end up Googling who works there, who are the leaders? Let me do some research. And so it also gives you a sense from the candidate side, if you're looking up individuals, not just the company, but also who works there and what are they sharing and what's their thought leadership like. And so I think it helps both the company and the candidate in the talent marketplace in that sense.
Yeah, and we started telling our audiences too a bit about, even if your employees are sharing too and creating content, it doesn't all have to be about the brand. It can be about, what their expertise is and what their personal interests are. And those things still affect, kind of like you're saying, the brand. I gave an example, and we're putting a post together about this, so stay tuned for that. But I had posted something, and I don't have a huge personal brand like yourself yet. I'm still growing it, but it had 15,000 views in 5 days. And I was like, well, over 300 people viewed my profile. People are clicking around. They can see the EveryoneSocial brand, or they can see my interests or expertise. And over time, you getting 2 or 3 posts a week for a year, that's hundreds of thousands of impressions, not only on my personal brand and giving me career opportunities, telling my story, but also my brand story that I work for. And people might Google us or, search our brand on LinkedIn or, find us that way. And it's pretty impactful. So, a lot of those out there who are considering, getting employees involved more or encouraging those personal brands too, is think of it that way too. It doesn't all have to be brand specific. It should be a nice mix of everything. It can really impact the company overall and the individual who's going to be more excited to share because it's not all just about their company or product or service. Their audiences care more because it's not just a sales pitch either, which I think is important.
And I think along those lines, another key piece is consistency is key. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a large following overnight. I don't still consider myself to have a large following. I do it because I enjoy it. And if people follow me, great. And if it resonates, great. But there's no such thing as a bad post. I'll joke there are days my husband won't like it. No one will comment. I'll be like, what happened? And I'll be like, okay, I still think it's a good post. Just didn't resonate that day. Move on. So don't get discouraged as whether it's from a company perspective or a personal perspective, you're posting and you're like waiting for the likes and the engagement. Yeah. Sometimes it just didn't, whether it was the algorithm, whether it was something else you posted that's competing, but all these different things. It doesn't mean that the content is terrible. It is a moment to pause and say, oh, interesting. I wonder maybe I was too generic. Maybe I wasn't specific, or maybe I wasn't raw enough for the audience to interact with that piece.
Yeah. And it could be the time of day too. Like we've seen that. I mean, LinkedIn is changing their algorithms all the time. And, we've had even people ask like, okay, how do we beat these algorithms? I'm like, you're not going to, because it changes so much, so quickly. Sometimes polls are like the hottest thing in the last couple of weeks, and you're probably flooded with polls and you're like, half of them aren't interesting. So you start to skip those. But we always say like the quality is always going to prevail. Like there's going to be times where you might not get as much engagement or have kind of the attention you think you should on a certain post. But if you keep posting consistently, like you're saying, and that quality of your thoughts and ideas, it's going to catch on at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I know we kind of touched on this too, and it's another part of the question, but maybe there's more to this too, is, I think we're kind of saying there's the career benefits, right? It kind of gives you your story a little bit, but I mean, why else do you think individuals should be really active on LinkedIn storytelling, right? And I think how can it benefit their professional and personal lives beyond kind of what we've already talked about?
Well, I think we've said this, it's your digital resume. LinkedIn is your digital resume now. I can't think of, I think this job, my job before that, all through LinkedIn connections. And so I think for me, it's a way to put myself out there, share my thought leadership. It's also a great way. I mean, I know so many people have a physical reaction when we use the word networking, right? Yeah. Networking. And I like to say building authentic connections, and LinkedIn's a great way to do that. I think you all had reached out to me through LinkedIn. And so I'm meeting so many amazing people during this time because many of us are isolated and alone, but it's a great way to build meaningful relationships and connections as well. And so I wouldn't underestimate that power as you're posting and sharing. I've had people that I've, for 17 months, like somebody was engaging in my posts and she sent me a note and said, "Hey, would you want to grab a virtual coffee?" I'm like, wow, we've actually never met because I feel like, multiple times a week, we're like engaging on a topic. And so I would just, if you're looking to grow your community, LinkedIn's a great place to do that.
Yeah. And actually that's exactly how we got connected with you. Is a coworker had said, "Hey, Mita posts some really interesting stuff. Might be cool to get her for Employee Advocacy Week." I was like, "All right, I'll go follow her." And I really like the stuff you're posting. And I was like, you know what, this would be a perfect person. That's exactly how we got connected. So it kind of shows you that power too. And I have some connections that I followed that was just through seeing their stuff on my feed all the time from other connections that were engaging with them. So that's another powerful instance with LinkedIn is like those secondary connections who you're seeing in your feed and you're like, "Oh, well, I never saw that person before, but so-and-so that I follow thinks they're important. I'm going to check them out too." So this can help employees really grow, at companies or their own personal brands pretty quickly too, is you'll be discoverable by other networks, that kind of network effect that goes across the channel, which I think is pretty powerful on LinkedIn, especially.
Absolutely. And you always, for me, I want to be engaging with my community and learning from them and supporting them. Anybody who's listening right now, if you see a job open at Carta, shoot me a note. If you feel like you're a good match, I'm happy to pass it along to recruiting and they'll get back in touch with you. And that's also the power of LinkedIn. I hope that someone does that for me one day when I need it. Right. And so thinking about how you're building your relationships authentically so that when you are looking for a next opportunity or have been let go, then it's not just like you're showing up to say, "Hey, I was let go, I need a job," versus like, "Hey, like we sort of had a relationship this last year, right? Off and on." And LinkedIn's a great way to do that because it's really difficult to, cultivate many, many relationships, but LinkedIn's a great way to do that more at scale.
Yeah. And I remember last year too, when, the economy was kind of not sure what was going on when COVID first started everywhere. And, a lot of people who were starting to look for jobs because of these layoffs, I've noticed a lot that were on social or had kind of start to build their personal brand, were able to make those connections a lot quicker and get hired pretty quickly at new companies who were still powering along at the time, which is really cool. And I think that's important for, a lot of employees who might be hesitant to get involved in social media for not only their company, but for what they're doing. It's just that there's more opportunities for you. Like I've been getting invited to podcast episodes, not that I'm doing all of them just because of lack of time right now, but I mean, people are finding me through that. And I have 3,000 connections on LinkedIn. I mean, it's not the smallest, but it's not the largest either. So it's kind of cool to see those things start to cultivate for itself just because I'm telling my narrative of this is what I do in marketing. Here's what I do at EveryoneSocial, and here's more about employee advocacy. So kind of tying those three things together is starting to build my kind of network.
And you can also be helping someone out by being on LinkedIn, just as the example I used for Carta. There are many individuals who I actually haven't met, but if you want to send me a resume and think you're a good fit, why wouldn't I pass it along? That's my job as a employee at Carta. So also you can equally be helping get people back to work, especially during this pandemic when so many people are looking for their next opportunity.
Yeah. And you have to think about the people too that don't interact with you. Doesn't mean they're not consuming your content. I think that's another important thing is there's people who are just more quiet on these social channels and kind of just, we call them lurkers at times, but they're just kind of following you along and seeing what you're posting, but they're not clicking like, or they're not commenting or adding anything, to that, but it doesn't mean they're not listening or paying attention. They could be, part of your network later on or impact you in some way that you don't realize.
That was definitely me in the beginning of my LinkedIn journey. I was the voyeur. I would scroll everything. I would read everything, but I was like, should I comment? I don't know. This seems bold. Maybe I don't comment. Maybe I give a thumbs up. And then I think with over practice and time, I just got more comfortable sharing my thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. Same for me too. I think there's a hesitation that you're going to feel like almost judged for what you do in a way, but once you kind of get over that hump, it becomes a lot easier to realize like, well, no one's really judging you. You're just being a part of the conversation, or you're stimulating a conversation. You can disagree with something and that's fine. But now you're building that trust and that communication. I think too, with that, it does help the algorithms warm you up because they show that you're active, right? So when you do post things, there might be more relevancy where those people you interact with are now going to interact back with you, starting that conversation, which helps other people discover who you are or your story. So I think what would be cool too is if you have in mind is, what brands or maybe other individuals that you think are really utilizing storytelling well right now, especially on LinkedIn, and kind of what makes them so compelling to you?
I have a number. Let me see. Lan Fan, who's a good friend of mine. She's the CEO and founder of Community of Seven. And so if you follow Community of Seven or Lan Fan, I'll put her name into chat. But she is posting a lot of just really great inspirational content on leadership journeys, things that she experienced in her career. And she's somebody who always, it's not just like, here's the quote. It's like, again, because you can post the quote. We can all find the quote image, but it's the story of how that quote has impacted her career or what she learned from it. And that's what she's building with Community of Seven, which is bringing together purpose-driven leaders and having weekly conversations on a variety of different topics. So she's great. Another person I love to follow is Rich Cardona of Rich Cardona Media. And he has a podcast called, I believe, the Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Locker, podcast. And so he's also posting a lot of great content on personal branding. And so I'm enjoying following him. He's somebody I really, another one who always is sparking interesting conversation, provocative, right? That's always, you don't always have to agree, but I'm like, oh, that's an interesting point. I haven't thought about that before. So he's another one.
That's great. And then what about brands too? Like, what do you think brands are actually telling storytelling pretty well? I mean, I'll say besides Carta, because I do come across your guys' content quite often.
Yeah, I'll say I'll go very different from fintech. I'll go into beauty.
Perfect.
Range Beauty is a brand on Instagram. Amazing storytelling. They're all about clean beauty products for the forgotten shades. So someone like myself who has had dark skin her entire life has not had an easy time finding darker foundations. And so they just have some beautiful imagery on, inclusive shades isn't just about having one or two check the box. Here's like my dark beige and my like medium honey and I'm done. Right. And it's they're showing sort of the variety of so many of the products that they have. And that's really compelling. And also just the imagery along with the storytelling is great. So that's one of the brands I've been following recently.
Very cool. Any others that you want to share, maybe in software? What other kind of industries you got there? Insurance. I know some of the fintech stuff can be harder to get over those humps with the corporate kind of traditional compliance. That can be a challenge, but it seems the ones that do the storytelling are really winning right now.
Oreos is a pretty good one. That's on Instagram though. I think a lot of the food brands are doing some really interesting storytelling, which maybe you would say, oh, it lends itself better to food, but I think it's pretty interesting and compelling. And so that would be another one. What are you watching right now?
Yeah, so you know me, I'm a software junkie, considering that's the industry I'm in. But yeah, I like the food ones for sure. Always good. I like when there's the interactions and the storytelling. I'm trying to remember the one that had done a really good video series, and I'll come back to me. It might have been Wistia or Vimeo. I'm trying to remember which one it was. They were doing really cool storytelling about small business and kind of how they utilize video. I thought that was really interesting. Drift, when they first were kind of blowing up and getting pretty big, were doing some really cool things. Not only their employees kind of just being a part of the story, but educating audiences about their conversational marketing, the category that they basically kind of coined and created. That was really cool to kind of understand and follow. And I got connected with a few people from there. I think Gong, another one that's kind of a name you can't really ignore at this point. But their CMO Yudi, I follow him a lot. He does really cool stuff. He does his personal things plus Gong, like he'll do stuff like playing piano and playing music and stuff, which I think is really cool. It gives you that personal feel and that almost like connection to him without knowing him, right? Yeah. And there's other brands that are doing that kind of stuff too. And I'm starting to see some of the fintech starting to really come around to that now. Which is really cool to see, I think, getting out there and really telling not only their story, but the employees telling their story along with the work they're doing, which I think is cool.
Another brand I've been watching is Canvas. They have the recruiting platform, and their chief people officer, Tarek. I was on the podcast, so yes, I'm biased, but even before they had invited me, I was watching that they were inviting really you would say their customers, right? Their audience, which is chief people officer, chief diversity officers, and really he's just a great moderator and host for a podcast. And so I love seeing some of the clips and the content from the podcast, which I think ties back into what they do and the purpose of their company. So I think that's another great one.
Yeah, I just started seeing some of their employees start to share stuff a lot. I think I actually just followed their VP of marketing maybe because I really was enjoying the content that I was seeing there.
I won't look at my phone right now, but I can't remember her name, but she's got some great content as well.
Yes. It's blinking too, because I just started following her like last week, but she kept popping up on my feed again. And again, it wasn't necessarily about the brand. It was like marketing information or interesting tidbits for me, because even though I'm in, this marketing position, I still like to learn from others or think of things differently. And immediately connected with it and I followed. And it was, again, somebody from my network that was liking her stuff that made me want to follow her. Yes. So again, that kind of network effect power, which is pretty cool. So for someone looking to just get started, how do you start? I think there's always that just start kind of thing, but, I think some people are still just hesitant to get started. So kind of what are the tips that someone should follow, right? I think obviously for me, it was figuring out the main three topics that I wanted to continually cover, which, for me is marketing and then employee advocacy and then EveryoneSocial stuff. But, wondering from you kind of like suggestions for others who are like, I'm hesitant, don't know where to start. How can I start telling my story? Where should they begin or how can they get started?
That's a great question. I think start with some of the basics of the profile. This might seem super basic, but make sure you have a picture up there. I'm still saying you don't have pictures. Keywords, things you want to be known for. I think to have a killer about section, make it interesting, share something different about yourself. I try to do that in mine. Of course, these things are not, they're fluid, right? You can go back and change that. And then I think exactly the second thing is, to your point, what are the 3 to 4 areas you want to be known for? For me, it's inclusive marketing. It is my work as a DE&I leader and a woman of color and what I've learned in my journey and being a working mother. Those are predominantly the 3 areas you'll see me post about. And my final sort of third piece is start posting like once or twice a week. Right? If you're going to be once a week, do it once a week for 4 weeks and then start doing it twice a week for 4 weeks. The consistency is key and not to give up. And also to do it when it works for your schedule, exactly to your point on the timing. Mm-hmm. The calm before the storm in my house is 7 a.m. After 7 a.m., I get up early, but then I'm trying to get kids ready for school. Hopefully they're going to stay in school this year. But I don't have time to do it at 10 a.m. Eastern or 12 p.m. noon, so Eastern. So do it for what it works on your schedule. If you're following me, you'll see that I'm posting usually between 6:45 and 7 p.m. Eastern. That's what works for me. And so I think the consistency is key, and do what works for you and just be authentic about what you're going to post.
I think too many people start off too aggressive, right? Like they're like, oh, I'm going to post every day and then I'm going to write all these things. And then you start getting burnt out. You lose time. Like you said, like if you're busy with work or family or other obligations, and then you're like, well, I give it up. And then you're like, this didn't work after 2 weeks. It's like, well, you're going too aggressive too fast. So yeah, we always recommend the same thing, kind of 1 to twice a week, or, if you want to schedule things out ahead of time, if you have a lot of thoughts. I find myself writing notes on my phone, like just randomly at midnight.
All the time.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have one note folder that just says LinkedIn, and it's just like content that I not only want to post maybe from mine, but to share in our platform for employees to share out too. Cause similar ideas, we try to put different things out there and see what resonates and, share those kind of tidbits. And I think that that's really beneficial for me. It helps take the pain off of it, because I don't have time to just be on LinkedIn all day and engage, but trying to set some time, every day, at least 5-10 minutes is all you really need to kind of get yourself out there, which I think is important. Optimizing the profile. Yeah, that we actually wrote a post about that, because it is kind of mind boggling to think about how many people don't have a picture or forget to put anything in their profile. You know how there's that name pronunciation that you can do on mobile, but if you have a really easy name, you can actually use that to tell a little bit of your story, like what you do or what your interests are, why you do it. I think the guys over at Sweetfish Media podcast group, which we also have them on Employee Advocacy Week with some pre-recorded content, they've done that with their little mobile pronunciation thing. It just says, hey, we produce, podcasts for B2B, and this is why we do it. That's pretty cool. You get to hear their voice. It's a little personalization, and it helps tell the story, which I thought was a really cool thing that they've done. So what do you envision as the future for storytelling and social media? I think obviously it's continuing to still be important after all these years. And again, with remote work and, these working situations changing, it still seems it's more powerful than ever. But, any predictions or thoughts on how you think this might evolve, or how brands or people should approach storytelling?
Well, I think audio is the new video. Can I say that? I know we're doing now, but I think anyone wants to give me a call, or I think podcasts are here to stay. And so more brands thinking about too, how can they be telling? I mean, I think there's a huge focus right now on personal branding through podcast, in terms of learning and development, huge opportunities in companies through podcasts and how you connect and elevate the employee experience, but also more and more brands like sponsoring podcasts, but also storytelling authentically. I think that's going to continue to stay. And I also think just the lines blurring. I think we're never going to go back to whatever it was we were when it comes to work-life integration, work-life balance, all that's out the window. So I think you will more and more see people sharing pieces of their life that you would say that's for Facebook, not for LinkedIn. Well, it's for everything now, right? And I would say before the pandemic, I wasn't sharing as openly about what it was like to be a working mother. And now I am. And I think similarly, people have stories that they weren't sharing until now. And so I think that is here to stay. I don't see us going back.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm seeing more people, kind of like you said, sharing more personal stuff than I've ever seen before. And definitely in the last 18 months, but in the last even 6 months, it just seems to have ramped up. And kind of like your point, I think more people are realizing this is kind of where we're going to start building these relationships now with audiences, because we can't be at these events in person as much now, or we won't be doing them anymore, or not going on these sales meetings, together. We're doing everything kind of virtually at this point. And I love the audio aspect too. I still think that's important. We launched our podcast in January. It's still pretty fresh. We'll have to get you on there as well.
Oh, awesome.
But we enjoy talking to customers and brands, just learning different things, and it seems to be connecting with people too. And those can be used and shared on LinkedIn too, and also tell that story.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll leave us all with is that employees are forgotten consumers. We often spend so much time thinking about who we're going to sell to and how much and what, and employees can also they're influencers. And so if we can get, like we were talking about, more companies to think, wow, my employees being on LinkedIn is an asset. It's not that they're going to look for a job. It's an asset. Like, they reflect the company, and that just is going to attract great talent. It's also going to help people to stay and grow with your company. So I hope that's my other prediction, is that more companies will continue to embrace LinkedIn to be a tool.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's starting to happen. The more conversations we're having, more customers have come to us to ask more about LinkedIn. And, we don't forget about Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It's still there. But yeah, it seems LinkedIn is kind of the powerhouse these days. And it's something that we're trying to encourage more people to just open it up. Let your employees be more personable, let them tell their story. It's going to impact their brand. They might not think about it at first, but when we show them, kind of explain it, they're like, oh, this does make sense. And we understand now why employees are getting involved if they're able to share and do things that are more personal to them. It's not just a big sales pitch, which I think is great. Cool. Well, I think, we're out of time here. If anyone wants to connect with you, where can they do that beyond LinkedIn, I guess is the main one, but how can they get in touch?
LinkedIn is the best place. Yep. That is my place where I connect professionally and build my
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, awesome, Mita. It was great to connect with you and have this conversation. I think everyone's digesting the information. So there's no questions, which is great. So we'll end it there. But thanks everybody for joining the session, and thank you, Mita.
Thank you. See you on LinkedIn. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more engagement insights. Want to know how EveryoneSocial can provide you with the tools needed to keep everyone at your company connected, informed, creating, and sharing? Visit EveryoneSocial.com to learn more.